Hey everybody, welcome to Getting Down with Dave Jones.
The barn owl, this guy, is the largest barn owl in the world. Again, they're found all over the world, but the ones found in the United States are the largest. The barred owl, B-A-R-R-E-D, with bars on its chest, which is where it gets its name from, is a little bit bigger than this guy, and the great horned owl is much, much bigger than all of them. Now, the great horned owl is such a good hunter, he actually specializes in eating skunks. One animal that is not afraid to take on a skunk is a great horned owl. They have the silent flight and the great hearing, again, which gives them that ability to swoop down on top of a skunk and kill it long before the skunk ever knows it's there, or long before it has a chance to ever spray the owl. So it's a pretty incredible way that these animals hunt and survive in the wild.
Hey Matt, what's his wingspan when he spreads his wings out like that?
His wingspan is just over 2 feet. It's a little bit more than 2 feet.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Sometimes he likes to hang out here with you guys. Yeah. Now, the next animal that I have for you guys is definitely one that is not native to this area, and it is an animal that you oftentimes can find around here, again, not because it's native, but because a lot of people have ended up getting this animal somewhere in the pet trade. Now, can anybody tell me what this little animal is?
Hedgehog.
It is definitely a hedgehog, absolutely. This little ball of spines is called a hedgehog. Now, a lot of times people do confuse these animals with porcupines. So, can anybody tell me the biggest difference between a porcupine and a hedgehog? Go ahead.
A porcupine is bigger than a hedgehog.
Absolutely, it's simply the size. Porcupines are huge compared to these little guys. This little guy weighs about 1 pound. And the largest one on this planet is called the African crested porcupine. And at adult size, it can get to be about 50 or 60 pounds, and it can stand about this tall. So it stands almost at my waist, and its quills are anywhere from 15 to 18 inches long. So they are much, much, much larger. Now, this little guy, as small as it is actually one of the best predators on our planet. When we think of predators, oftentimes we think of something like lions or tigers or packs of wolves. Now, these little guys are found in Africa, oftentimes not too far from where you might find a pride of lions. Now, lions in the wild oftentimes only get a meal 30 to 40% of the time. Only 30 to 40% of the time. But this little animal, as small as it is, can get a meal usually about 90% of the time. So this little animal is a really, really great hunter. And part of what makes it such a good hunter is simply its incredible sense of smell. I'm going to walk around so you guys can get just a little bit closer look at this animal. Does anybody have any questions about this little hedgehog? This little animal loves to eat just about anything and everything. This little guy eats different types of fruit, but it will also eat lots and lots and lots of different types of insects. They love to eat worms. They love to eat small frogs, small lizards. Does anybody else have any questions about this little girl? All right. Now, the last animal that I have to share with you guys this evening is an animal that many of you guys may not be really that fond of, but if that's the case, I ask that you guys still stay in your seats and just kind of relax, because I promise I won't let it jump on your head or anything like that.
It might be
Now, I promise that this animal is not a poisonous snake. If this was a poisonous snake, I definitely would not handle it in this way. I would handle it much, much differently than this. Now, this little guy's name is Jake, and Jake is a ball python. B-A-L-L. He's not a bald python, although he doesn't have any hair. He is called a ball python, not a bald python. Now, the reason he's called a ball python is because of his defense mechanism. Now, in the wild, animals, when they feel threatened, they do one of two things. They're either going to run away or they're going to try and fight. This little guy is definitely not a fighter. This little guy doesn't really run all that well either, so he does something different. Anybody have any idea what he does? Go ahead.
He squeezes.
Well, that's how he gets his prey, is he constricts. But what he does is he actually curls himself up into a little itty-bitty tiny ball and hides his head in the coils of his body, because his head is the most vulnerable part. If his head gets injured, chances are he's not going to survive. So he curls up into that little tiny ball and hides his head in the rest of those coils in order to protect the most vulnerable part of his body. Now, this little guy also has a lot of great adaptations that help him to survive in his environment. Now, one of the best adaptations that these guys have is an adaptation or characteristics that we don't even oftentimes think of when we look at a snake. But it is simply what makes a snake a snake. So what is the one characteristic that makes this animal unique or different than all the other animals on our planet? Not necessarily how it smells. It does smell a lot different than other animals. It slithers because it's missing legs and arms, absolutely. It doesn't have any arms or legs. So when we look at a snake, we're so used to seeing an animal without arms and legs, we don't even really think about it. But that is what allows this animal to be such an incredible hunter. Now, what do these animals in the wild love to eat? Mice. They love to eat mice, absolutely. And these little guys do use their tongues to find mice, and they have that forked tongue so they can actually taste the ground. And if they taste more of a mouse on the left side of their tongue, they go to the left to find it. If they taste more on the right, then they go to the right to find that mouse. Now, once they find that mouse or get to where the scent is strongest, that may actually be where the mouse's home is. So where do mice live? Does anybody know? Go ahead.
Sometimes the little burrows.
Little itty-bitty tiny burrows, little holes underground, absolutely. So that is where those animals are found. So if, let's say, a fox or an owl or some other larger animal were to find a mouse's burrow, is that animal going to be able to fit into a mouse's burrow? Absolutely not. But this little guy, because he doesn't have any arms or legs, is going to very easily be able to get into that mouse hole and get his next meal simply because he doesn't have any arms or legs. Now, does anybody have any questions about Jake? Go ahead. In just a minute, if you guys would like to, before I put them up, I'll let a few of you guys touch them. You definitely do not have to touch them. Now, this little guy has been around the Knoxville Zoo for about 10 years. He was actually a pet for about 3 years before he came to the Knoxville Zoo. Now, oftentimes, people who get these animals as pets do end up being donated to zoos or pet stores or other places like that. And oftentimes, the reason is simply because the person that buys them, they don't realize how much it takes to take care of an animal like this. And usually the thing they don't realize the most is simply how long this animal lives. I mentioned that Jake is about 13 years old, and he can easily live another 10 years, possibly another 15 years. This animal could live easily 25 or 30 years throughout his entire lifespan. So if you guys are thinking at some point about possibly getting your children a snake as a pet, you might want to consider all that and ask your children to think about those kinds of things. Because this animal, again, is going to live possibly 30 years. So they need to think about, where am I going to be in 30 years? Am I going to go off to college? And am I going to be able to take the snake with me? And if the college dorm room says no, are mom and dad going to want to take care of it for me while I'm gone? And when mom and dad say no, what are you going to do with the snake? And even if they say yes, After you graduate from college, are you going to end up marrying somebody that wants a snake in the house? It's also a good question to think about. So think about all those things and ask your kids to think about all those things before getting this kind of animal as a pet. Now, it doesn't necessarily make a bad pet. It's just a lot different than your dog or cat. They're not real great to cuddle with, and they definitely don't catch frisbees very well. Does anybody else have any questions about this little guy or any of the other animals I brought this evening? Well, go ahead.
How often does he shed?
He will shed. It depends on how old they are. Usually the older animals will shed less often. It may be once a month or it may be once every 2 or 3 months. It also depends on how much food they get and how quickly they grow. Good question. Any other questions about this little guy or about the zoo? Go ahead. This animal eats 2 mice every couple of weeks. So he eats every couple of weeks. All right, guys. Thank you guys all for having us out this evening.